What's up, fam? I'm Jazz, and this is Blackxecutive, a networking podcast for Black creative pros by Black creative pros, sharing inspirational stories, actionable advice, and giving away the game to succeed in your business and your career. Join the network where dreamers become doers and the aspiring become inspired. Listen and watch on Blackxecutive.com. Let's get to it. What's up, Blackxecutive fam? It's your girl Jazz, and you're watching or listening to another season 2 episode of Blackxecutive Podcast. Today we'll be talking to Dominic, an economist with his head in some of everything, including having his own podcast, the Keep It Simple Stupid podcast. And I'd like to announce that his pronouns are he, him, his, and real nigga. Welcome to the show, Dom.
Thanks for having me.
When I heard that on your first episode, I was like, I respect the shit out of that, man.
Hey man, listen, you got to respect people's pronouns, but it also got to be known I am a real nigga. So preface it. I'm trying to preface everything by saying I am a real nigga, but that's what's happening.
Yes, I respect it. I respect a lot of that. Okay, so I know we have a lot of stuff that I wanted to like talk about because I just want to pick your very big brain. Super excited. I don't think I've ever even talked to an economist. So this is super exciting for me. Okay, so who is Dom? Like who are you?
I'm a member of a family. I'm a child. I'm a significant other. I'm a Christian, and I happen to be a nerd who is interested in economics and in markets, and specifically how that affects my people. I actually did not want to initially become an economist. I wanted to do communications. When I first got, or I studied history when I first got to college. My mom told me I need to go get a business degree, so I picked the degree that was the most interesting to me, that had the most to do with history and like people in general, and that was economics. And I then learned, specifically how economics affect the development of continents down to just communities. So people talk about communal wealth and how to build that. That's actually a development economic principle. How do you take a community that may not have a lot, that has been, systemically ostracized from, a functioning market? How do you take that and how do you develop it and build it up so there's some sort of wealth or power or whatever inside that community? So I found myself studying that, and it was interesting to me.
Okay, yeah, that is really interesting. So you kind of just like we're looking for something. So you say you were considering communications before you went over into like economics and everything. Where would you? I almost want to where would you imagine your career have gone if you had went like the communications route? Like, what do you think? How do you think you would have still continued to do that type of work?
What's funny is as I've started transition out of what I do currently for a living, which I do like logistic pricing for a Fortune 100 company. As I started to like transition out of that to an extent, I have found myself more into communications, where I'm frankly just communicating with people. So I think I would have ended up somewhere near policy in a political space, communicating overarching things. But instead, I've been in a position where I could just communicate a very niche, specialized type of communication to people who, frankly, unfortunately, haven't been shared this information.
Yeah, I feel that. It seems like you kind of do that a little bit with your podcast, Keep It Simple Stupid. Like I know you're kind of getting started with that. Can you talk a bit about that and the strategy behind it?
Yeah, so the inspiration for Keep It Simple was my Twitter account. I got tired of people relitigating some of our political, I'm gonna call them heroes, but our political figures. Whether it's Barack Obama, Kamala Harris, the Bush years, the Biden years, and I found that you had a lot of people who would have these very large, antiquated opinions on very complex issues, like the Biden crime bill, which actually was the Clinton crime bill, or about Barack Obama's presidency, or if it was about Kamala Harris's history as a prosecutor. And I would find that they would just have these, to an extent, kind of just half-baked opinions. To an extent, just kind of half-baked opinions on things without really having, the nuance and the expertise on them. So I took the time to research these things, and I would just break it down and add all of the nuance to the subject. But I would keep it simple, and I ended up getting some traction in that, and individuals told me I should do a podcast. So the Keep It Simple podcast, that's was born, where we take, the most complex issues you can imagine. And I always say they're seemingly complex because, frankly, this stuff ain't as hard as people make it out to be. It's just packed in a lot of jargon and etc. And to an extent, that's purposeful, or that's intentional. It's packed with a whole bunch of jargon to keep people away from it, so they don't fully understand the nuance of it. And those who do understand it have some sort of advantage in whatever marketplace they want to have that advantage in. So if I can take and break down stuff, and I can really tell people the history of something, and I can make them understand it in a way that they get it. I can speak to them at their level. And when I say their level, I don't mean that to demean them, but just meet people where they are. That in total will become a smarter, more aware, more advanced society.
Yes, for sure. I see that in, because when I think when people even just hear the term economics or anything about the economy, the mind just goes, especially like in the Black community, it's like, that's just not, we don't really do that. That's not our thing. But it should be. And it is, and we do. So I think, and it's exactly because of that, because a lot of the jargon goes over people's heads, and it's overwhelming, and it just seems like so complex. So that your podcast is definitely a public service for sure, for being able to explain these concepts, and I'm really excited about where it's going to go. Really.
Yeah. Hopefully we do something good. Hopefully, at least.
All right. So now that we're actually into the economics part of the podcast, I have a trillion questions to ask you. So, cool. So, as we know, recently President Biden mentioned a minimum wage increase of $15 an hour. So, every time this comes up, there's someone that mentions that this will result in inflation, and I heard you really give a really good explanation in the Clubhouse room on this. So can you talk through, the history of how increasing the minimum wage impacts the U.S. and the effect that it has on the U.S. economy?
Yeah. So in short, it doesn't have a major impact. Just to give like a very short, quick answer. There was a study done by I actually have it right here, by the Upjohn Institute, that said that for every 10% increase you have in minimum wage, you get about a 0.26% increase in inflation. So we see that there's not a large impact one of another. And that's just kind of a short answer. But I would more so like to talk about why people think that. And that's because we've been talking economics from a very it's professionally referred to as a neoclassical perspective, which is supply side economics, which is just, hey, with supply equals demand, and you have to like meet equilibrium. If you've ever had an Econ 101 course or intro to micro at a collegiate level, you have to meet market equilibrium, and you can't affect you can't increase wages too much because it could devalue the dollar. You don't want to print too much money because it affects the economy, and that's a very simplistic way to look at it, frankly, because it's easier to teach it. Just to be frank. But in fact, when we look at it from a reality perspective, when we look at the history of it, and we move away from economic theory and more into economic practice, we see that in actuality, markets are a lot more nuanced. Markets are a lot more complex, and a lot of things factor into something as simple as increasing wages that could lead to inflation. It's not just as cut and dry as if there's some sort of 1-to-1 ratio. We've seen over histories, over decades of research, that if you increase wages, inflation really isn't affected much. You might see some increase in unemployment potentially, but the cool thing about that is you don't make economic policy changes or just financial policy changes in general in a vacuum. There are a a myriad, a whole host of changes that you'll see occur in the United States over the next couple of decades, or the next couple of years during this Biden-Harris administration, and all of those things will have different impacts. So, if increasing, minimum wage has some negative effect on overall employment levels, and it can increase unemployment, you're going to have a whole host of other changes that are going to come into the market that are actually going to push employment out, and it's going to decrease unemployment. And also when we talk about unemployment, you can't just look at it purely from, the perspective of was a job created, but was a quality job created? Is it a job that can provide a living? Is it a job that comes attached to healthcare? Is it a job that can do something positive for the community? It can free up time and space and lead to innovation and creativity and overall lifestyle? Or is it just, some minimum wage job where individuals aren't, getting what they need to survive? So I think that I'll tell people, if increasing minimum wage is going to have a negative effect on unemployment, then those are jobs we don't want people to work anyway. I want to look at what's the number of quality jobs I'm adding to a market, jobs that people can hold and sustain and build their life around, not just jobs so people can get a quick, undervalued paycheck so they can continue to tread water.
Yeah, that's an important call out. What is the quality of the job that's being created? And I think that's something that's often overlooked, because we feel like if you just throw people in these low wage jobs, that should be enough. But we know time and time again that's not adequate for people to be able to survive. It's not a livable wage, like you said. So that's just like one of the things that came up, of the many list of things that Biden is going to be working on for the country. So what changes in the economy that you feel will be brought on by this administration will directly impact communities of color?
I think an overall investment in us. I think that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have paid attention to Black leaders to some extent, obviously with Kamala Harris being a Black leader. I think you'll see a larger investment in our communities. I would say primarily marijuana expungement and decriminalization at a federal level. I tell people all the time that marijuana will be the new cash crop. If you look at what cotton did for just cotton and other crops in the South, but primarily cotton, floated and empowered the United States economy for the first 150, 200 years of our existence. The United States economy pre-industrial revolution was cotton, essentially. And that's why the South was so powerful. That's why, the South was so aristocratic. The wealth in the United States, primarily pre-industrial revolution, was in the South. It was all those huge places and all those Victorian homes, etc. So if you look at how that one crop fed a whole nation, imagine what marijuana would do to just the South. So what you want to see, in my opinion, from the Biden administration is, I want expungement of all Black people, or all people in general, who have marijuana convictions on their record that could prevent them from entering the marketplace. Because it's not just about freeing them. If you free me and I have a marijuana charge, now I can't get the license required to grow legally, or to get into the dispensary business, or even into the logistics of it. We talk about a cash crop. We don't talk about just growing it and selling it. You have to transport it. You have to house it. I work in supply chain for our logistics for a large company. I can tell you how much money we spend just on moving things from point A to point Z. The amount of certification, CDLs, hazmat, etc., that'll probably be needed just to transport marijuana across state lines legally once it's federally declassified and legalized. That's going to be probably $100 million, if not multi-billion-dollar industry. So I want to make sure that our people get all of the expungements and get all of their legal rights back as citizens. But also, when we go to the table, I want to make sure that there's equity put into my community. You have a lot of Black farmers in the Black Belt that have this amazing land that's primed for growing and for infrastructure. I want marijuana planted there, and I want them to continue to own it. I don't want that to go to big ag. That's a whole bunch of white people who have invested in the middle of the country. I want that to go to the southern farmers in Alabama and Mississippi. The Mississippi Valley has some of the best growing land in the world. I want nothing but marijuana planted there, and I want all of the people in that community to reap the benefits. I want them to reap that tax revenue. I want those schools to be. You talk about, how do we get more funding into HBCUs? I'm from Texas. I live in Texas. I can tell you the amount of money that UT and A&M get from oil revenue as universities would be enough to fund every HBCU across the country. So I want to make sure that our people, when marijuana is declassified, and marijuana is legal federally, I want to make sure that we are in those equity conversations, that we get our fair share, and that Black people in the South, because honestly, most Black people from the South own some sort of land in their family. Your great grandma still owns 15 acres down home, or or your cousin's still paying the property taxes on Big Mama's land down there. That's not even talking about the farmers in the Black Belt that own 150 acres. I'm talking about me and my family that owns 10 acres in Southeast Texas. 10 acres of prime growing land is enough money to put some real wealth in the communities. That's enough where every grandkid in the family don't got to pay for college no more. When we talk about wealth, we're not talking about just creating new robber barons. We're talking about really rebuilding a middle class in that community as well. So it's not just rich quick schemes or just making everyone millionaires. It's about really fortifying a Black middle class, and you could really do that if marijuana is distributed equitably within our community.
Yes, that's a lot of good call outs that you made, especially about a lot of us having that land in their family. I'm in the same way. I have land further down in my family that other people are still managing and running and whatnot. So with that coming, and I know it may be, I don't know, another year or two, a few years, up to, I don't know how long it's going to take for us to get there. What do you think?
Well, I will say there's a bill currently that was written in the House called the MORE Act that sat on Mitch McConnell's desk, and he's now out. There are a lot of people that are calling for that to be rewritten and repassed. So you might see that really within this next session of Congress, which would be amazing.
Wow. That would totally be amazing. That's exactly what I was going to ask. Like, what can we do now to, prepare?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of people that are calling on it. So I would not be surprised if you see that within the next session of Congress, the MORE Act, which is a federal expungement and then declassification, which would make way for federal legalization or allow the states just to individually legalize at the level which they do. But to answer your question, what would you do now? I would say just try to set up the infrastructure. If you do in fact own some land in the South, make sure that those taxes are paid up on it. Make sure that you're good and clean on it. Because I mean it's coming. Marijuana legalization will come, I would say, at bare minimum within the next decade, but more likely within the next 2 to 5 years. And that's going to be a major cash crop. It's going to be a major cash crop. I mean, you look at marijuana stocks, the way they're booming right now.
Yeah.
That lets you know that people know what's coming, and people are trying to get situated, trying to make sure they're in a good position. So make sure that your position is solidified as well.
Yeah, that's important. And if you're not up on marijuana stocks, so listeners, you should definitely research them because that's a smart play. I know we've had a few guests that have talked about stocks. All right. So what other ways do you feel like communities of color can begin to like invest in their financial security in today's economy?
I would just say overall ownership. And it's kind of a played out thought process because we've been preaching ownership for such a long time. And that's because it's true. That's because it's real. Gentrification is problem is something that we have to fight within our communities, but also we need people who operate on the policy side to make sure that the structures are in place to fight gentrification for us as well. But what we can do on our side, just individually, is make sure that we own as much of the things as we realistically can. Keep control of if your grandma passes, go ahead and keep control of that home if you can, or if you can't, sell it to another Black.
Yeah.
Don't allow outsiders to come into our community that we have invested time in, that we have cleaned up, that we put the culture and the charm and all of the things that are valuable, and don't let them come in and push us out.
Yeah.
I've never been the kind of person to say, oh, you need to own 17 things, have 6 different LLCs. That's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm preaching.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't LLC get rich quick Twitter here. This is me telling you, you want to make sure you have something that you can hold and that you can own that's going to retain some value. I'm not telling you go out and buy some art, but I am telling you, whatever is in your family that you can own, keep it. And if you can't keep it, sell it to somebody Black so they can keep it, so that wealth can matriculate and stay in our community. Shop Black-owned businesses whenever you can. I'm wearing a hoodie from a Black-owned company right now. This year, since we've been in quarantine, the only thing I've been purchasing is Nike sweatpants and hoodies and T-shirts from Black-owned companies. That's my way to contribute. Eat at Black-owned restaurants. Go support your local Black-owned barbershop or salon, as long as y'all being COVID safe in there. But just make an exerted effort to do Black things within our community, because that dollar has to stay just a little bit longer here. The dollar has to stay in the Black community just a second longer, and that's how you really get some wealth to really start to build and really start to matriculate.
Yeah, we definitely got to keep it in. I know the last stat on that is that of all other races, we hold on to our dollar the least amount of time. It's like a matter of hours in comparison to days and stuff in other communities in which their dollar circulates. And we got to work on that for sure.
And to be clear, a lot of that isn't necessarily our fault. A lot of that is structural issues. A lot of that is concerted effort by white supremacy, by anti-Blackness to burn our buildings, to get rid of our value and our communal wealth. So it's not our fault. I want to make that clear. But there are things that we can do to get a little bit better at it, while also advocating, legally and structurally, from a policy perspective, to basically take your foot off our fucking necks.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's important too. A lot of the issues that plague our community are not our fault, and that's definitely one of them. So that kind of segues perfectly into another issue in our community, and not just the Black people, but people of color, period, is us being in these low wage jobs. And as we move into the age, deeper and deeper into the age of automation, and we know that a lot of these jobs that people are doing now are going to be, cut out and replaced by a, faster, smarter system. And, automation is up on us. And a lot of times we hear it as a doomsday scenario, like, millions are going to lose their jobs. So can you talk a bit about, the pros and cons of automation and how you think that impacts our community?
I'll say a couple of things. I would say first, automation is inevitable. It just is what it is. Technology increased. That there's something called technological unemployment, which is essentially unemployment that's created by an increase in technology. And something that I was told when I was an undergrad by one of my professors is that unemployment is something that's relatively new. The idea that an able-bodied human, which when we talk about employment, we're not talking about individuals who are not in the workforce, that don't have the ability to work, or people who are too rich to work. We're talking about able-bodied human beings that have a desire and a capability to work, not having access to work. That's something that's relatively new. That's something that's in the entire history of humanity, that's maybe 200-300 years old. It's something that's really industrial revolution, because prior to that, you could just go work a farm job. You could just get some money and work it yourself. You could be a laborer on someone's land. Everyone used to work unless you were either too rich to work or you literally physically could not. And the reason that is because we started to get technology. The Industrial Revolution occurred, and all of those some of those manual labor jobs, like actually sewing things, actually picking, fruit and cotton, actually physically tilling land, was automated, and now you had machines that can do it. So you start to kind of unleash this this cat out of the bag, and you start this process that can't really be undone. So it is a threat to Black people. I think that people talk about it in so much of a doomsday scenario, it kind of becomes like a boogeyman. To be clear, we're not going to automate away all jobs in the next decade. This is something that is going to be century, maybe 2 century process, more than likely, just to get to the point where you're really fully automated with things. But there are some jobs, for example, truck drivers, that are probably on the chopping block a little bit sooner. You might see really automating away truck driving via autonomous driving in the next 20 years. So there are people who are buying their first trucks and getting their CDLs and making all these investments into open up this trucking business that might not be able to retire in that. And if you think about it, that's kind of a scary idea. So automation is something that we do need to focus on, but it's nothing that's right around the corner. And unfortunately, efficiency means that people are left behind. Frankly, is kind of what it is. So in order for them to be more efficient, you have to trim off the quote unquote fat on it. But unfortunately, when we talk about stuff like that and trimming off fat, that fat is not useless waste. That's humans. That's people's jobs. That's people's ability to provide, for themselves and for others around them. That's people's access to health. That's people's access to, housing, food, etc., shelter. So, whenever we and economists talk about trimming away the fat or becoming more efficient and really leaning into automation to drive marginal utility, we're forgetting that efficiency is human beings. Or that efficiency comes at the cost of, the quality of living of human beings. And at a point, when do you have to make sure that you're having adequate employment level so people just have enough money to purchase the things you're talking about?
Yeah.
Where's the benefit if you can create something so efficient without the need of any human beings, but there's no human beings to purchase it?
Yeah, right? Exactly.
So that's kind of the line you have to walk. And I would say the best way to do that is a UBI.
Yeah, that was my next question. So that's perfect. So for those who don't know, that's universal basic income. So that's been a topic of conversation a lot, especially more frequently as we, like you said, the age of automation, even though it's not right around the corner, but it is coming up, and that's something we have to think about. So can you talk about that and why it's important in how you think the implementation of one would alter American society?
The easiest way I can say it is I was talking to someone a few days ago, and they said that jobs are for robots, not for humans, to just give people the money. And that at its core is what it is. I think in a lot of people recently, because of Andrew Yang, which love Andrew Yang, very intelligent human being, have kind of frankly gentrified UBIs. UBI is something that Black people have actually been advocating for economists in general as well, have been advocating for since the Great Depression, if not earlier. Martin Luther King famously advocated for UBI. So this is something that has been put in work. There's been a lot of theory on it. There's been a lot of study on it. There's been application. Right now, if you live in Colorado, the state of Colorado, if you're in certain areas and you meet certain requirements, there's mail your check every year or every month. In Alaska, they provide UBI for some of their citizens. Some of the Nordic countries provide some sort of UBI for some of their citizens. And that's because those states are making so much money because they're moving so efficiently that after they pay for everything, here's a check. Just have it. And I think that's something that as a country, as we become more efficient, here's the thing, we're going to become unprofitable. This is what it is. But with that excess money, do you just give it back to the rich people, or do you provide for your community as a whole? And we've seen in economics that you have to provide for the community as a whole in order for your system to stay afloat. When you only focus on supply side economics and putting money at the top and trying to let it trickle down, which is popular as Reaganomics, trickle down economics, that's where you get crashes. That's where you get depression. That's where you get the recession of 1988. The housing bubble of 2006. All of those recessions that really affected our economy. That was because you cut taxes, you tried to force wealth into the top and assume that it would trickle down, but that's not how it works, because you have a velocity of money, and money has to move around the middle class and the lower class in order for an economy to help. Because if money's just at the top, all they do is hoard it. So a UBI is essentially just the greatest form of redistribution of wealth, because what it does is it creates literally a universal basic income, which means I don't have to focus on working to provide for my lifestyle. Like the idea, especially as we become more automated. And listen, I get it 300 years ago. I get it when you were at a point in time where you literally had to own land and produce something in order for you to have something. You had to actually plant the food you grew, or you had to plant something so you could grow it and trade it for the food you grew. You actually had to have some land and some wood in order to build something for you to have shelter. I understand it back then. But now we're in a consumption-based economy, a production-based economy. If I want something, I just have to have enough money to buy it. I don't have to actually go build my home. I just need to have the money to pay someone to build it. And if we get to the point where you have automated building and you can just throw a building up overnight because a robot is doing it, then I just have to pay a machine to do it, essentially. So at that point, you're talking about people's access to consumption. And the idea in an economy where we don't have to produce anything, someone's ability to provide for themselves being tied to their ability to produce something that they're not even the most efficient person to produce it for, is just ludicrous. Just give them the money and allow them to live their life. And that leads to an overall healthier, happy society. If you had a universal basic income, if you could guarantee yourself $60,000 a year, just hypothetically speaking, and that was enough money for you to have housing, for you to have food, for you to have a nice car, and for you to be able to send your kids to, a very nice school if you want to do private, or it was enough for you to buy a home in a good area that has good public schools. What would your day look like? Would you still work? Probably, because you wouldn't want to be at home just bored all day. Or maybe you would focus on your health and work out all day. And we would be a better, healthier society. Maybe we wouldn't have such an obesity issue. Maybe you would have time to focus on mental health and go get counseling. So we wouldn't have such a depression issue. Like the overall tangible benefits and the way it kind of extrapolates out to society as a whole is so huge, solely because people won't be required just to work to live. And that's why UBI is amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like as a creative, that's really interesting to me because of the exact points that you made. Like if a lot of times, and one of the goals of this podcast is that people have these very creative dreams and things they want to do, but for some reason they can't start their career. They feel like they can't, or there are obstacles in the way. And so they take a day job that they don't find fulfilling, that they don't enjoy, because they have to make ends meet along the way. And they may like do a little bit of creative stuff on the side, but most of their time goes into working this job that they hate, like sucks the life out of them, and so if you have a UBI that's being implemented, they don't have to do that. And so you'll start to see more and more creativity flourish, I feel like. So like, what are your thoughts on, I know you kind of talked about like some things that people could focus on, but what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I would say this. We have been told this lie that out of scarcity comes innovation. That, if people don't have to work, they'll no longer innovate. They'll just kind of lay on their butt and be lazy. And that's not how that works. Or, or that people have to want to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps. And that's how you have innovation. When I believe the term is it's rather rude to tell a bootless person to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps. What we see is that throughout the history of all of time, at least in Western modern culture, the greatest innovators have all been relatively middle class white men. Bill Gates, what was the person who made Apple? His name escapes me, but the individual created Apple, Bezos with Amazon, even Elon Musk. All the people were either rich or relatively middle class white men. That isn't because white men are just smarter than us. It's because white men are privileged enough to come from homes that allow them the time to innovate. Like they have the freedom to leave Ivy League educations and go work in their parents' garage because they're not afraid of failure, because they don't need to work. They choose to work, and they choose to work on things they like so they can innovate things. With Black people and people of color in general, we focus on survival. We work out of necessity so I can continue to put a roof over my head. I don't have time to play with trivial things like a dream. I have to pay bills. Whereas white men, they're allotted, the freedom to go create stuff. So they go create, and they go create Facebook, and they go create Microsoft and Apple Apple and Google and all of the other, like Ford, like not even out of like the .com bubble, they go create Ford. The Wright brothers built a plane in a garage.
Yeah.
From a bicycle shop they had. So but the key thing is they were business owners and they could do that because they had the freedom to do so. If you're a pure laborer and you're a pure worker, you don't have time to innovate on the company clock. They don't allow that because you have to go to work.
Yeah.
So I think we have to get away from this idea that out of scarcity breeds innovation. It's freedom that breeds it. Creativity is a privilege for the free, not for the not for the workers. So what a UBI does is it allows a freedom of movement essentially amongst the market, so I can do whatever I want. And as a human being, you want to do something. There's something you want to do.
Yeah.
What the UBI does, it lets you do that, and once you become good at it, you have new innovation.
Yes, I feel all of that. I feel like that's a whole sermon right there with just that one piece about like, yes, we just have not had that luxury and had that privilege. Because I mean, going to work, that's what we know how to do. You got to work, you got to do what you need to do, and all the rest of that other stuff that's nice to have. But right now, I got bills that need to be paid. I got kids who need to be fed, or whatever. Mama needs some money. I got to get that done for her. Whatever it is, you got other stuff that's more important than sitting around playing around and coming across Facebook and all that. So yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to a time when we do have UBI implemented and that happens. I'm sure I'll be old, but if I'm around.
Maybe not. You might see it coming in the next decade.
Yeah, I would hope so. So what other misconceptions do you think that people often hold about how the economy works?
Oh my God. How much time do we have? I'll only give you a couple. I would say I think people simplify economics too much. And it's weird that I have a podcast called Keep It Simple. But I mean, the thing about economics is it's so intricate. It requires so much nuance, and it's not just simply supply and demand. I mean, we've all seen it, supply and demand, and the chart goes here, and if you move, it goes. It's not just that. In fact, an economic market isn't just 4 lines. It's a lot of curves, a whole bunch of squiggling, a lot of erasing. It's so complex. When we're talking about trying to tie it all back into the inflation conversation, in theory, it's very simple to state that if you increase wages and you flood money into a market, it in theory should inflate the market, and that's bad. But in actuality, it's so much more complex than that, because I have to take into account what the Fed's going to do, what interest rates are right now, how the market's going to react to it, what's the history of the market, what else is occurring. So I think that when people give short answers without the nuance to very complex, long economic questions, and I think that that's one of the biggest misconceptions of economics. The second thing I would say is socialism as a whole. We've heard this buzzword thrown around: socialism. You've heard democratic socialism. You've heard, if you're a little farther left leaning, you probably have read some of the ideology and workings of Marx. You've heard the criticisms of the classical view of economics from Adam Smith. And here's what I'll say on that: we're in America. Obviously. And we in America have been functioning on a Western view of society as a whole. And if you do that, it would lead you to believe that economics was birthed by Adam Smith.
Yeah.
Saying that economics was birthed by Adam Smith in The Wealth of Nations would be like saying that Christopher Columbus birthed America. He didn't create economics. He observed it from a white man's perspective and wrote about it. You look at the economics of the Ottoman Empire, which was frankly socialism. You look at the economics of ancient China, which was to an extent actually Japan was more feudalistic because they had lords, but the economics of China was frankly communism. You look at the economics of Native Americans, that was quite literally communism. They didn't believe in property rights. When the Europeans came to America and they said, "This is our land," the natives said, You don't own land. Land belongs to all of us. That in itself is a communistic idea. So I think that the biggest misconception is that we taught and think and view economics purely from a middle class white man's perspective that was written in 17th and 18th century. So our viewpoint of economics goes Adam Smith, Karl Marx, and then John Maynard Keynes. And that's basically how we're talking about economics. When in fact, economics has existed since the beginning of time. Whenever you have capital, you have capitalism. So as soon as you had some sort of resource that could be moved and bartered and sold, then you had structures that were put in place in these societies and these communities. They weren't just savages, so they had rules that were implemented, put in place. And I think it's almost a tool of white supremacy to state that economics pre Smith or Marx or Keynes, they'll call it they'll call it ancient economics. It's not ancient. It's not the economy of savages. These were human beings who lived very long and prosperous lives. And they had amazing structures and systems and put in place. And to be clear, I was once, a perpetrator of this. But I took the time to actually study economics of Africa, pre-colonialism. I took the time to learn the economics of Egypt, of the Ottoman Empire, of the rest of Southeast Asia, of the Pacific Islands, and they all had these very interesting viewpoints on what socialism is, of what capitalism is, of what communism is. And I think that we have to stop looking at it purely from the gaze of the Western European world, where we teach the same 7 things. You have Wealth of Nations, you have the American Revolution, you have the French Revolution, you have Marxism, you have John Maynard Keynes and the Great Depression, and then you have supply side economics and demand side economics. That's not the history of economics. It goes back thousands of years, not just 300 years. So I would say that's probably the biggest misconception that I hate so much.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and I definitely don't know enough about economics to even know to like dig deeper beyond that. So just again, like you said, the basic stuff that I learned in college or whatever that was necessary for my requirements and my discipline, So yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up. Speaking of Africa, so Africa, there's been a lot of talk about like where their economy is headed and them being in a cashless society and them kind of moving into this crypto space and us kind of trailing behind that, and even a lot of movements about Black people in America doing more work with Africans in Africa and kind of bridging that with this unity of Blackness. What are your thoughts on that? Like, have you done any research into it?
On crypto specifically, or just Africa as a
just
whole?
Africa's economy as a whole and where they are positioned now.
I think that we have seen Africa to an extent be left alone long enough, and we're just not getting there. Which honestly, they're still siphoning resources from Africa. So let me not say that we left completely alone, but to an extent, there are parts of Africa that has been left alone for the most part, and they're starting to figure it out. Anytime you understand, this continent has frankly had their resources just brutally stolen from them for about the last 600 to 700 years. I'm talking human beings, gold, overall land via colonization, all natural resources were stripped from this country. And about 40 or so, maybe 60 years ago, certain nations kind of like, all right, we'll leave you alone now. So, with that, you essentially have to rebuild up everything. So, you're going to have a whole bunch of issues. You're going to have some tribalism. You're going to have, some people misusing their authority and some corruption. But if we continue to support Africa, but also stop stealing from it, you give it another space as a continent to figure it out via every individual country within the nation. So I think that's probably the thing that's the most beneficial and what looks the most. But I'll say what Africa needs primarily is really just infrastructure. When you talk about building, well, like I said, I study development economics primarily. In development economics, the thing we always say is the first thing a country needs is infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
You need roads. You need access to sewage. You need access to clean water. You need internet. You need not internet for sure, as in a more modern economy. But you need a system of infrastructure where you can one communicate, two you can have some sort of medium of exchange.
Mm-hmm.
Both at the city level, at the national level, and at the continental level, and then you need some sort of like structure in drawing map lines. Because understand, when we talk about the countries in Africa, that's stuff that like white settlers put in, and they like essentially drew those lands and those maps.
Yeah.
In Africa, countries weren't really a thing. They were very tribalistic.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it was white people that came and said, "Okay, here's where Nigeria is. Here's where Niger is. Here's
Right.
where is. This is South Africa." They drew that up. So the people of Africa as a continent have to come in and they have to essentially reestablish what their whole country looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, you can rebuild things and function it. But I would say first you need to really lay out the whole infrastructure of the entire continent.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of go from there.
Yeah, for sure. I'm excited that they're starting to do a lot of this work, and we're starting to hear a lot more buzz about the growth and
Yeah.
And I think as Black Americans who are like so desperately was looking for a way to root our identity in something that's going to be important for us. You have like the return to Africa. God, I don't know. What did they call it? I don't remember what it was. I think it was Ghana that recently did it.
Oh, yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So like I know because of things like that, I know that they're leveraging Africa has been kind of leveraging the Black Americans' need to kind of want to connect and using that to pull, that tourist dollar in. I think it's very smart. It's very smart for them. Yeah. So
Genius.
yeah.
I'm very excited what the future was them owning their culture as
Mm-hmm.
a continent, being able to maximize on that, them becoming somewhat of a tourist destination, them becoming
Mm-hmm.
a breeding ground for innovation, for technology, for
Mm-hmm.
financial perspectives. I think that the future is bright continentally in Africa, so that's great for us.
Yes, definitely. All right. So as we kind of get ready to wrap up, I have my core questions that I always ask all of my guests. Um,
Okay.
so one of the first is, the first, what is a current recommended or a past read that you would recommend for people who are trying to better understand economics? Especially now that you told us like all that history shit that we read is like not it. So like you gotta leave us something. Where can we start?
um I mean, I would go. I think Freakonomics is a good starting point. That's generally what they'll tell people to read,
Mm,
like
yeah.
Econ 101. I think that's a good starting point. But honestly, I primarily read articles more than I read actual econ books if I want to understand economics. So
Mm,
I would suggest just subscribing to the Economist, and they'll send you daily articles, and you can kind of read. Frankly, what you'll need to first do is just get like your appetite wet.
mm-hmm.
You need to get your appetite wet, for the subject, and then once you do that, then you can kind of develop and go kind of more nuanced. But I would
Mm-hmm.
recommend, subscribing to the Economist or reading Freakonomics. Both of those are kind of easy reads.
Mm-hmm.
That production in.
Oh yeah, Freakonomics is it. I think I read that back in college. I want to say they had a podcast. I think
They
they have
do.
a podcast too.
I listen to the podcast from time to time.
Yeah.
They do some dope interviews and they'll break down some very interesting subjects with a lot of
Mm-hmm.
nuance. So I love Brown's podcast.
Yeah, definitely check them out. And if you're watching this, I'll have that in the description. And definitely in the show notes if you're listening to this episode. Okay. So what are 3 to 5 actionable steps that you have for those who are looking to like better prepare themselves for this shifting economy that we're going to see with the Biden administration?
Oh man. I think that finding your way into the marijuana market will be big if you want to make a lot of money. I
Mm-hmm.
think buying stocks in general
Mm-hmm.
be pretty good. I would say getting into the EV area, which is electronic vehicles, whether it's via Tesla, that's like the popular one, but GM is getting into EV, Toyota's getting into EV heavy. The batteries that they make, I want to say Panasonic is now starting to make the batteries to an extent. So getting around that space would be amazing. So I would say marijuana and electronic vehicles. And then a third one would be own some land. You're going to see a whole bunch more development, specifically in the South, because you're going to need to get, frankly, we're growing as a country. And cities are becoming too packed, and the rising of cities is going up so much. So these cities are growing out. So, if you own some land, keep it, because that value is going to go up. And if you have enough money to buy some acres 20, 30 miles outside of a major city, in the next decade, that's going to become extremely profitable, because as those cities grow up, grow out, grow south, etc., that land that you bought very cheaply might be worth a whole bunch of money in the next couple of decades. So that will be the couple things I'd say.
Oh yeah, definitely. Think about that land in between, where people are who don't want to live in the city, they want to live just on the outskirts, or in between both, or you have one partner who works in one city and one in the other. And definitely can see a lot of different ways that could go, for sure. And last question, before we wrap up completely, how do you feel that your work impacts the Black community?
Hopefully good. Hopefully. I think that it's everyone's job and everyone's responsibility just to do a little bit and do what you can. So I would say hopefully it's good. Hopefully we're doing some good, positive work. And we'll see if we continue to grow. But hopefully good.
Yeah. Good. So always good to hear like how everyone kind of sees themselves in the larger scheme of everything. And I think you did a really good job explaining it, like when you initially came on and talked about like just the education piece with the podcast and everything, and even just being on this particular episode, educating the audience so that we can, make better decisions. And just even knowing what everything that you've said about like what you taught in history was not necessarily so, which we should know by now. But
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So how can people find you to keep pace with your journey?
Yeah, so my Instagram is at Dapper Dom, or my Twitter is at Dapper Dom. My Instagram is at Dapper DJ Damo. So follow me on my socials, and the Keep It Simple Stupid podcast can be found on every podcast streaming platform. So Spotify, iTunes, Google, etc. Wherever you listen to, we post that. So check us out, please.
There you go. That's how you find them. Well, Dom, thank you for really taking some time to like explain everything to us. Like we're 5 because we needed it. And definitely going to get more of that by listening to your podcast and tuning in. Because I feel like this is great work. We need someone who can break down these very complex ideas in ways so we can understand.
Right. Well, hey, I appreciate you having me on.
Thanks for watching Blackxecutive. Join the conversation in the comments below and be sure to like and subscribe. You can find a full list of all available podcast episodes on blackxecutive.com or wherever you stream. Until next time, keep aspiring to inspire.